The man, Wilford, that our name comes from, Petersens. So I know that we aren't all Petersens, but anyone who has Petersen blood, Wilford is the man who carried the Petersen name. It's Grandpa's grandpa. I'm going to tell a little bit about his childhood, his mission, his early years as his courtship, his marriage, and I have no idea how he died, but I do know when he died. And then I'm going to tell a couple of stories that he uses his own words to tell. First interesting fact about Wilford, he is the first American. He's the first native-born Petersen here in America. Wilford was born 1889, died 1952. His dad was gone to Denmark when Wilford was 3 years old. His dad left on a mission. His mom worked to send money to his dad on a mission back in Denmark. Wilford says, I wore dresses until I was 3, and I remember the day I wore my first pants. I watched Mom make them, and I went to the corral to show Pa. 3 years old when he first got to wear pants. He herded cows at age 6. He started school at age 7 and stayed in school till he was 14. He drove a team of horses at 8 years old. When he was on his mission, or just before his mission, he went to the Emory Stake Academy from 1908 to 1909. He was asked by President Joseph F. Smith to attend the missionary class. He was called to Samoa on his mission. Pa, or Christian, his parents were Christian and Margaret. Pa was disappointed because he wanted his son to go to Denmark. He got called to Samoa instead. He left on May 15th and 1909, and he traveled from May 15th to July 4th. He went from Farron County, or Farron Creek, Emory County, Farron Creek, traveled up to Portland, then to Seattle, then Vancouver, and then to Fiji. He returned 3 years later in May. He spent 3 weeks in Fiji before he made it to Samoa. When Wilford, this is Wilford, when Wilford was away from home, a lot of bad stuff happened. While he was away, his brother got spinal meningitis, or polio, they're not sure which, but it caused a lot of stress on the family. Several of their best milk cows died, and several of their best workhorses died. His father lost a leg, breaking it somehow in front of a wagon while the horses were lunging. His family was very stressed when Wilford was gone, and him being the oldest son caused major strains on the family, but they never regretted sending their son and having him accept a call on a mission. While on his mission, he says, it seems like all the Samoan celebrations are about alike, just one continual round of something to eat. While he was a missionary, he hosted meetings, preached, and spent a lot of time running schools from different villages. He was always talking about running schools in his missionary journey. He got seasick often, so he hated when he had to go on little boats out of American Samoa and go to these little towns. He would eat, before he left, he says, he fed the fish more than they fed him. He was up checking over the edge a lot. While he was there, he slept in a mosquito net fairly often. Spent most of his time in very small villages. He mentioned a village with a population of 600 being the largest by far of all the villages he had ever been to. That was 2 years into his mission. A lot of times he didn't have a missionary companion. He was by himself. Saw a total solar eclipse on April 28, 1911. A complete total solar eclipse. Another one's coming August 21st. Go to Danelle's house or Julian's house or Rexburg is where you really want to go. Yep.
When is that?
August 21st of this year.
21st.
Next one won't be until 2024. Next one, and now you have to go to St. Louis. The next one in the United States won't be until 2048. Breadfruit, coconuts, taro, bananas, and fish on his mission. Dealt with sickness, measles. A lot of people died in Samoa from measles. Dealt with anti-Mormons, apathy, both self and with people. Has stories of casting out bad spirits. During the last few months, Wilford got rheumatic fever and was in pain for several months. He has a 4-month gap in his journal. He could not walk for that 4 months. He was taken care of by his missionary companion. There are stories of him also getting rheumatic fever as a child as well. Elder Stevens is the name of the elder that took care of him when he was sick. He laid down on June 16th and didn't walk again until September 29th. Got a letter in that December, a couple months after he started walking again, got a letter saying that his dad had broken his leg and asked for him to come home. He received the news from his father and decided not to respond or not to go home until he got one more letter with additional information. His faithful service was an example and blessing to his children and his wife his whole life. So here's his own words. He says, "There is an incident which happened just before I returned from my mission that you should always remember. Paul was taking some produce to the tithing office and was met by a not-so-active member, and they stopped to chat. He told Paul that he said, 'Why, Chris, you should have the church help you instead of you paying tithing to the church.' The neighbors had brought teams and helped the family with their farming, but this was Paul's answer." Remember, he just lost his leg, all this stuff. "I don't know where it says a man is only supposed to pay tithing when something is going all right. I believe in the promise the Lord gave to those who pay tithing, and I need all the blessings. The Lord can give me now more than any time in my life, so I pay my tithing." Courtship. He was pretty shy, at least initially. Three-year mission. After a 3-year mission, I believe he was still intimidated by Mormon women his own age and language. He was used to seeing a lot of naked Samoans quite often. He met Lillian 18 months after he got home from his mission, walked her home for the first date. Lillian consented only because he was a returned missionary. Had his friend ask her on the second date because he was a little too shy. She didn't really even know it was a date. Ha!
It probably wasn't.
Yeah.
Just in his eyes.
He asked her directly, "Are you a good girl?" Here's one of the moves he made while dating. On one occasion, this is from Lillian's perspective. On one occasion, we were walking. He took my hand and put both of our hands in his overcoat pocket as we walked and conversed. I felt a security I never experienced in my life. I knew I loved him and hoped I'd never lose him. In early spring, he proposed gently, saying, "I want you to be my wife. When can you give me an answer? In a week? In a month?" Lillian made it 2 weeks. Marriage was set for fall so Wilford could build a house, but as spring progressed, one night Wilford said to Lillian, "Let's make it June. It would be so much better if we were together. It's going to be awful hard to build a house while I'm single." I agreed, although I knew it was too soon for me. I wasn't prepared with clothes and was to work hard and we changed our plans. They got married on the 11th of June. Marriage. They went to Salt Air and then Lagoon Resort. Wilford forgot his temple, or their temple recommends. So we had to go back and was late to their very own wedding. Lived with mom and dad in the boys' room for 6 months, Kumar. Till their own house was done. Called into the bishopric 1 month after getting married, or called to be bishop 1 month after their getting married. While bishop, his counselors collected enough money for the down payment on a Model T Ford. Total cost of the Model T was $600. They picked the Model T up, carried it into the church on the stage, and hid it behind the curtain to surprise him. He loved it and finished paying it off. First 22 years of marriage, they stayed in Farron or the Manti area. 10 children. In 21 years exactly, the last child, Stephen, was born on the first child's 21st birthday. 6 weeks after they arrived in Mesa, Arizona.
1 minute.
By the
Give
way,
him 2 more.
our grandpa, Warren, used to be called Warnie. Warnie was his nickname.
Warnie.
He hated the name Warnie. When they moved to Arizona, Warren said, "My name is now Warren. It's no longer Warnie. Please don't call me Warren or Warnie anymore." And he was known as Warren ever since. According to Lillian, Wilford and Lillian never had a quarrel of any kind. He died in 1952. Registration, in the 1942 registration, he had to register for the draft, but he was no longer eligible because of rheumatic fever. He was 5 foot 8 inches, 142 pounds. Now there are 2 stories here that I feel are pretty important. They're that long, but I don't need to read them. I'll try to read one.
Okay, Roy, time's up. So
Okay.
wrap it up.
Our line, he talks specifically, he has a message that he wanted to share to his posterity, and these are his own words. There's 2 paragraphs, I'll just read the first one. Wilford says to you specifically, I desire with all my heart for you to know your great heritage. For there flows in your blood the birthright privileges and promises of ancient Israel. Because through our lineage, the heritage and rights of the priesthood have descended to you. The family first heard the gospel when my father, Christian Petersen, was 19 years old and believed it immediately because it sounded familiar to him. My father served his mission to Denmark when I was 5 years old. He left my mother with 3 small children. He attended the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple, and his father, Christian, on April 6th, 1893, on his way to Denmark. And then he tells a very interesting story of forgiveness, but because my time is 30 seconds over, I'll end. I love you. We have wonderful heritage. Wilford was amazing.
So she was the third child of George Foote and Leanna Bell Jones, and this is them right here. You can see this picture. Okay? Now I want you to look at these two people. They had 11 children. 10 of them were daughters. Oh my gosh. Right, Becca? That's what I thought too. They had one son. His name was George. So George had lots of moms that he probably had to deal with growing up, and one of those was sweet Lillian. She was the third child, and this is her in the middle with when she's a little baby. See that? And she's cute. And then when they were young ladies, they kind of redid the picture, and there she is in the middle. Right there. So I'm going to pass this one around. You guys can see it. Okay. She went to school. This is a picture of her in her classroom. I'll pass this around too. And then that's a picture of her parents. So you can kind of see what things look like. I could not figure out which one she was. In the book that I have that you're all welcome to look at, it kind of lists the students, but I couldn't tell which row was which. So when she was 12 years old, she went and lived with several other families to do housework. The money that she earned went to help support her family. She says, my family moved from Emory to Farron in 1913. I had mostly lived with other families since I was 12 years old and did housework to assist my family. I immediately began work for Tina Allred, who was expecting a new baby. Here I milked a cow twice a day, took care of the mother and baby, made bread, and did all the cooking and the cleaning and the washing. At this time, Thomas Allred, a returned missionary and a good boy about, convinced me to marry him. But I was confused and wanted to talk to Father. I asked him, how can I know if I should marry? And he said, well, a woman must know that she loves a man. A man can learn to love a woman, but a woman must know that she loves him. And my mother quite agreed. So she married Wilford, and you heard that story when she was 19 years old. So she and Wilford settled in Farron, Utah, and they lived in the boys' room of his parents' house while they were building a house for them just about a block north. So making a challenge, this is from the book Farron Creek. If any of you have this, some of you might, some of you don't. I told Royal to buy it online and he did. It's a good book. So this comes from this book. Making a living was a challenge for those young people. The country's economy was in a slump and farmers found they were receiving less and less for their produce. When Lillian was expecting her first child, she was deeply worried because she could not afford material to make a layette. Finally, Wilford sold a calf he had wanted to keep for stock, and because of the depressed prices, he received only $16 for it. Lillian was frugal, buying just the minimum amount of material for her sewing. She made a little satin jacket from the skirt of her wedding dress and said later, 9 of my babies wore that jacket to be blessed in, and Lena still has it. So, as Margaret's daughter, so Wilford's sisters would get married, and they and Lillian, the daughter-in-law, they had a lot of the problems that their mothers had known. So each of them had babies every couple of years, and they would carry these babies without any kind of prenatal care and birth them with basically the help of a midwife and no anesthetic. Anybody who's done that knows that's no fun. They knew the pain of childbirth, and first babies brought more pain and difficult labors for the mothers. But as Lillian said, she said, each baby was a gift from God, and when I held my little warm baby in my arms, it was worth all the pain and worry. So Lillian was particularly adept using herbs to take care of illness. And the more I read about this, the more I realized that particularly Warren and Lillian's family was plagued with illnesses. Like, kids got hurt and sick in their house all the time. It was like Murphy moved in and never moved out. But they had colds, flu, pneumonia, phlebitis, blood poisoning, and their children experienced diseases like bronchitis, abscesses, cuts, burns, bruises, broken bones, concussions. So when Zelona was born, this is Lillian's second daughter, her own mother came and helped her, and the baby got really sick with pneumonia. And her mother put turpentine packs on this baby, and it healed baby. Turpentine. I thought that was interesting. So once Wilford and Lillian moved across the road from their parents, they kind of spread out in this house, and it was really nice. But the flu struck again in 1919, and this time Wilford was stricken seriously. The disease affected his feet, and he was months recovering. One day, Lena disappeared, and Lillian hunted for her, and she finally found the little girl hiding under the bed because she didn't want that flu bug and wouldn't come out till it went away. So when our grandpa Warren was born, he was born on June 18th, 1921, and Lillian needed some surgery. She had a very difficult birth, and she had to have some repair on some torn tissues. She wrote of this experience. This is kind of a sacred experience, and I want to share it with you. She says, Dr. Easley operated in our home. The nurse was Wilford's cousin, Meddy Nelson. My parents, Wilford and his mother, were there, and I closed my eyes when the sleeping hood was put over my face. I was soon out. My spirit was alive and awake. Someone stood in the air a little to the left of my bed and reached out and beckoned for me to come. I went up and away from my body and looked back on the scene. My body was lying there, and each one around me. We went through the wall as if there wasn't one, and in the air higher than the house. I looked in the direction of Grandma's house and saw Lena and Zalona were just going through the gate. Their faces were very sad. Quickly we went a distance and stopped. The guide that sounded 3 loud and distinct knocks. I thought the whole world had heard them. A portion of the misty sky opened to the most beautiful, whiter than white, shiny fibers of gold-like sheer metal and came into view close to us. And a small area parted. A person in white appeared with an open book, and he said, "We are not prepared for this lady yet." Quickly the small opening closed, and the misty sky overshadowed us. We went a short distance downward when the guide said, "You go the rest of the way alone." And after this operation, my health improved. So she and Wilford had 10 children. She lost her husband and her youngest daughter before her own death in 1986. Her baby daughter, Lilybell, died on her mission when she contracted meningitis. And it was mistaken at the time for a psychotic break. And because of this, the treatment for her condition was delayed and she lost her life. This was very hard on my great-grandma. And I remember her being in a nursing home, crying for her baby, Lilybell. She just couldn't ever get over it. Anyway, I remember that she was always happy to see us. And when my grandpa decided to move to Missouri, he wanted to make sure that his mom was taken care of. He built a little house behind, I can't remember, Dad, was it Uncle David or Uncle Steve? Uncle Steve's house, and she had this little house. And I will tell you, I had forgotten this, but when I moved to Spokane, and it's called the Lilac City, Spokane is, and the first time I ever smelled fresh lilacs, I had this distinct memory of my great-grandma Lillian's house smelling like that. She used lilac soap in her bathroom, and her house smelled like that. So I'm always glad that I have lilacs in my yard, and every year when they bloom and I have that smell, I remember her house. And so I just wanted to share with you those stories about Lillian, and one little thing that I have from her is a little thank you note that she wrote me when I got baptized, and I keep it, and I still have it, so I just wanted to show you. She says, "Thank you for being a nice girl and for your baptism, Grandma Petersen," and then she signs Lillian at the bottom. So there's my stories for you.
Today's Grandpa Peterson's birthday.
Really? It is. Great.
Peterson
That's a
for
good
you.
one.
Yeah,
He's here today. Good job, Larry.
Say his name again.
Joseph Spencer Burke, and we learned quite a bit about him. And of course, he was had I think 4 different wives and 24 kids. We heard. Well, one of Jacob Hamlin's children, a daughter, was the mother of Joe Spencer Burke, and her name
Lois Hamlin.
Lois Hamlin. That's right. Okay. And just a little bit about Lois. She had 10 children, and only 4 of them lived to adulthood. So that just kind of gives you an idea of just the difficulty of having kids and raising them during that period. But one of them obviously that survived was Joseph Spencer Burke, and he was very close to his older brother Will. There's a 3-year difference between them, and they did pretty much everything together. And I didn't prepare a ton, but I want to share two incidents from his life, and then it's kind of long, a poem that Will wrote that kind of explains what life was like in Sunset, Arizona. So they were part of a group of saints that migrated from Utah to Arizona at the request of, I don't know if it's Brigham Young, but they were part of the colonization of the West. So anyway, let me read Joseph's own words, and he says. We don't have the exact date here. He says, I was working in Clifton, Arizona at the time of which I am speaking. I was riding on one of the cars of an ore train, which at the time was carrying merchandise to Morningside, where after unloading these metal cars, they refilled them with copper ore. Before returning to Clifton, near the head of the incline on this narrow gauge road, where the train is made up the second time, there is a long tunnel through which we had to pass. On this trip, we had passed about halfway through, as I supposed, when a strong urge caused me to slide almost instantly down from the stack of candle boxes on which I had been sitting on. When all of a sudden the brakes were on and the train stopped quicker than I had ever seen one stop before. I now found myself a prisoner in a steel cell with a flat wooden roof over my head. Of course, I knew what had happened. The load of lumber, which had reached way over the car in which I was riding, had shot forward past the center partition against which I had been sitting, with about half my body above its top edge. It is not necessary for me to give my version of what would have happened had not that divine power caused me to drop to the bottom of the car. So, in other words, if not for that impression to get down to the bottom of the car, when the train stopped suddenly, he would have been pretty much impaled. Yeah, probably cut in half. So, and there's actually an even more amazing story I'm going to share right now. That I've read this multiple times and I still can't get the picture in my mind of what actually took place, but it's extremely remarkable nonetheless. So he worked at he never had any formal education. He says that everything he learned was from the School of Hard Knocks and from the forms of the priest is what he said. But he worked at a sawmill with his brother Will, and here's the incident as he describes it. Another incident which happened a few years ago while I was working at the sawmill with my brother Will. I was a fireman and usually oiled the machinery before starting to run. This task I had almost finished, all except oil cups around the saw cap before we went to lunch. Will returned just before I did, turned on the power, and had gone some little distance away for something. I hurriedly took the oiler so that I might finish before the other hands came to work. This I did without turning off the power. And while reaching way over to get the last bearing, some part of my clothing must have got caught on a set screw in one of the large collars on the 12-foot steel shaft. At any rate, I felt myself caught and whirled rapidly around for a time. Then I lost consciousness. And when I came to, I was in a stationary position, lying on my back crosswise of this rapidly revolving shaft. I was in great pain and began calling to Will to stop the mill. But before he reached the engine, I was thrown a considerable distance, landing in a pile of sawdust. Bill came over and helped me up. I had no clothes on, except my shoes and a part of my socks. On going back later to the shaft, I found my garments wrapped as neatly around it as one might wind a bobbin. Removing them from the shaft, I found that they were not badly torn or damaged, but with a little patching, I could wear them. My shirt and trousers were so badly cut to pieces, no attempt was made to make them wearable. I was not seriously injured, though greatly bruised and shocked. I have no explanation as to how this last mention came about, but I know again that divine providence was with me.
5 minutes.
So, anyway,
Can I say one thing right there?
yes.
The big saw blade was over here. It's huge. It's about 8 feet in diameter. So it's to cut these great big huge logs. I've seen the sawmill. We burned it down when I was a kid because it was all dilapidated. But they had this big steel thing that came from the engine. It's a steam engine. Came across like that, and it was buckled together with a pipe and a shaft in it with a bolt. And they would just stick a bolt in there. Well, he would reach under, reach over. What happened is he reached under this bolt caught the back of his clothes and ripped them off of him. They went back to the bolt. The only thing wrapped around it was his temple garments.
How do you survive something like that?
You don't. Unless
Your name again?
Clara Adeline Curtis. Okay?
And I'm going to have Grandpa kind of finish off because he knew her. And she was quite a little lady. She was very small and very spunky. And has such an interesting story. She was born in St. John's, Apache County, Arizona, the 1st of November of 1880. And her family was very poor. You know, the saints had been called to go there and they were assigned to go there and set up the community, like the people were assigned to go to St. George and settle it, thank you. And so they were in the middle of all that, and they had, you know, there just wasn't anything there. There was no economy. You didn't go and get a job. They were just there, and they just had their log cabin and their little stove and their kids, and that's what they had, and they had to make do. So that she was born at that time, and then when she was, I've read her history, and her history is very difficult to follow. So I'm going to do my best because I wasn't able to clarify it before I came today. But her grandmother, so we've got Clara Curtis's grandmother, who is a whitey. Her grandmother came to Arizona with her son and 2 daughters, one of whom Joseph Burke married, okay, which was Clara Curtis. Clara Curtis's mother, okay. So Clara Curtis's grandmother, I have it written down here and I just didn't get this stuff. But anyway, this is her grandmother, if you can see that, and then this is her parents, Henry Curtis and Harriet Biding, Arizona. And they spent a couple of years there. And her father and mother came with her grandmother and her grandmother's other children to Arizona. And while they were in Arizona, Clara Curtis was born. Okay? When Clara Curtis was 2 years old, they decided to travel back to Mapleton, the Springfield, Utah area, because Aunt May was feeling as she could remember that she would be better back there than she would be in Arizona. So they started traveling back to Arizona when to Utah, when Clara Curtis was 2, and on the way to Springfield and Mapleton, Aunt May died. Okay, so that's why Clara Curtis was born in Arizona, but raised for a long time in Mapleton, okay, and in that area, in the Springfield area. Well, when they got to the Springfield area, her father built, and eventually they had a very lovely home, and they had a very nice home, and they had a nice life. Well, they lived there, and she goes back and forth between her life and her father and mother's life, and her grandmother's life. So if I'm throwing pages back and forth, you'll know why. Okay, so while they had a little house in the canyon, which was kind of more of a ranch, and then they had a little house in Mapleton area, and they'd go back and forth winter and summer between the 2 homes. But her mother had 5 daughters, and at that point in time, her grandmother was very elderly and needed help, and so Clara was assigned to go and live with her grandmother. And there was a little English lady that was on the train with her who had a very beautiful white nightgown. She says, "I've never worn this nightgown, it's very beautiful. How much you wear this?" And so this lady gave her her nightgown. She was married in a beautiful English nightgown. And she talked about that. Well, they moved back to Arizona. Eventually, ended up in St. John's, and they were called from St. John's, she and her husband, to go to New Trioso. They had a lovely home in St. John's, and they were very happy. They went to New Trioso, and they almost had nothing the whole time that, it's hard to know. We're so grateful for those people, for what they suffered. And you know, there's the flip side to suffering. That side is the reward for obedience. There is no suffering that even can compare with the magnificent reward of obedience. I testify to that personally. If you will obey what you should do, you will always be better off, regardless of the suffering. Suffering comes and goes throughout life. You're going to suffer, there's no getting out of it. But reward is a result of obedience. And not everybody gets that. you get to choose. Well, anyway, they chose that obedience. And they moved to New Petersen, and your Grandpa Bert was called to be bishop. And my mother-in-law said she was the youngest of their 5 or 6 children. I'm trying to recount there how many
8 children.
They had 8 children. Okay. Well, she was the youngest, and she said that she was very upset one day because she wanted a new dress and didn't get a new dress. And she went in and looked at her father's shoes, and they just looked brand new. They were all polished and beautiful, and they looked brand new. And she thought, you know, my father has this beautiful pair of shoes, and I don't have a decent dress to wear. And as she was thinking all of this, her man touched the shoe, and it turned over, and his shoes were full of holes on the bottom. But he was the bishop, so he kept them shine to keep the people happy, you know, to give them an uplifting spirit. And so after that, she was happy with her lot. But
Dad. So his parents, so Mormon Harold Tracy's paternal grandparents were converts to church in upstate New York, and they followed the saints in the early days of the church. His father was born in Council Bluffs, Iowa, so and then crossed the plains when he was 18 months old. His maternal grandparents joined the church in England. They worked in a garment factory making socks and underwear. They joined the church and they immigrated to Utah. They had 4 daughters, one of which died on the plains. His mother walked the plains barefoot at age 10. Both Elon, okay, this is his parents, Elon and Emma, had a parent that died when they were young. So Elon's father died when he was very young, and Emma's mother died when she was young. Respectively. Now, there's a courtship story between Elon and Emma. I don't have time to tell that, but it's really cute. If you hadn't heard it before, I can tell you about it later. Elon served a mission at 32 years of age to the eastern states and then to England. And during that time, he gathered records of his family in the eastern United States and then records of his wife's family in their Uvalde temple. When when Mormon Harold was 4 years old, his father, Elon, practiced polygamy. So Elon had 3 wives. Okay.
Healing.
no, it's
Okay, Elon. But anyways, I read his book, Dad, so his name's Elon. So Elon had 3 wives. Okay, his first wife is the one we're related to. Her name was Emma Marie Burdett, and his second wife was Emma's sister. Okay, so he married sisters, and he had a 3rd wife. But because he practiced polygamy, he was persecuted with the Evans-Tucker Act. He went to jail for a year. He was in jail with Lorenzo Snell. Anyways, because of complications there, died. So when Mormon Harold was 4 years old, his father had passed away, so he grew up very poor. His mother, Emma, had a total of 14 children, 12 of which made it to adulthood, and she was a widow for 40 years. His grandfather, his maternal grandfather, gave him a milk cow, and this was really important for their family. Well, he got busy fishing one day or goofing off, and the cow got out, started eating some grass, and got bloated and died. And he was really worried about his grandpa finding out, so he avoided him for a period of time. But Grandpa Burdett eventually caught up with him. But he was very kind to him, asked him how his fishing was going, how things were doing. Made him feel even more guilty, but he's really kind to him and taught him some responsibility. And he never forgot that lesson. One day he got in a fight at school with some kids, or the smart kid broke his suspenders and his pants fell off. He got real mad. So he picked his pants up with one hand, he's fighting his kid with the other. He says, but their fight got interrupted, so they decided to go fight somewhere else. And when they went somewhere else, and this other kid brought his friend, he says, well, he beat up this kid really good, but his friend beat him up even worse. He missed school for a few days after that. One day he was out, and him and a buddy, they gathered up 100 swallow eggs in this barn. And they're like, what are we going to do with these things? So they went to the schoolhouse, and they thought the knob on the schoolhouse was a good target. So they started throwing all these eggs at the schoolhouse door. Of course, it made the schoolhouse stink. But they didn't know if someone was spying on them. And later they went to school, and the teacher said, Mormon, did you do this? And of course he lied. And later she found out and taught him not to lie and made him clean it up. So that's another lesson we learned. Him and his buddy, they were kind of smart about making money, so they'd pull weeds and sell animals they killed to make money here and there. They even dug up like a skunk that someone killed and sold it to what they said a Chinaman in town, making nickels. So one day when he was 11, him and his buddy, they thought, well, we're making this money doing this stuff, but they were tired of living in northern Utah, Ogden, Utah. They're tired of this cold, the work is hard, so let's go to California. There's orange groves there, it's warmer, we can make more money. working in the orange fields. This is when they were 11. So they jumped on a train, they made a plan, they ran away from home, they had a little food, they jumped on a train, and they were on that train for 3 days. They got to the Nevada desert and decided, well, they're really cold, they didn't bring enough clothing, they ran out of food, and they're about to cross the mountains. So they said, you know what, it's a bad idea. So they jumped on a different train going back, so they got a whole week. They were 11 years old, and so he showed up at back at his mom's, and she was terrified he was gone, but she was just happy he was back. She made him something to eat, and he said he never left home. Months without person script. In fact, he spent a good time. His mission companion was Robert Andrus, who we're learning about from the war. They were mission companions from the war.
really?
So Mom's grandfathers were mission companions in Southern States Mission. While he was on his mission, he caught malaria. It plagued him throughout his life. When he came home, he started working. He got engaged to a girl he'd written on his mission named Nellie. Nellie is Helen Jane Everett. But later she dear John him when he was off working herding sheep. He was real sad about that, so he went to visit her to say his goodbyes, and then he started dating again. And then he started dating some other girls, but he really loved Nellie. But Nellie said, no, I'm not interested. Well, none of these other things worked out with the girls, so he decided to enlist in the military. Well, Nellie caught wind of this. He says, well, I don't want you to sign up for the Marines. And he said, well, you know it's going to keep me home. So the week later, they went to the temple and got married. Different jobs throughout his life, including farming, sheep herding, and sales. He did really well as a wholesale produce broker. In fact, it caused him to have to travel around the country. He started that job at $100 a month and worked his way up to $225 a month between the years 1918 and 1922. He quit the brokering job after a few years because of being away from his family, traveling so much. He took a pay cut from $225 a month to $150 a month. That's a pretty steep cut. But and he worked for the Idaho Potato Growers Exchange. He said he never regretted doing that. But after 2 years, he lost that job. That was in 1924. So after that, they bought some land and they built their house. And in the mid-20s, late 20s, they bought a service station with some cabins that they rented out in Yukon for people that would come and go visit Yellowstone. So that was their job. During this time, they started raising their family. That's when Claire, our grandfather, was a child, so he grew up, helping out with the cabin, service station. They lived this very Tom Sawyer kind of life the kids did. He had some major health issues in his life. He had a stomach ulcer, and he had to go to his dentist. The dentist said, we have to take all your teeth out. So he got all his teeth out first and get dentures, and then a few months later, his experiences, he tells a story. He's in the hospital, he's laying there, and these 6 nurses walk in. And he's like, he didn't know what was going on, but 2 of them had a bed sheet, one on each end like this, walking to his bed. And then quickly they tucked the sheet around him, and another nurse grabbed him in a headlock, and then the 2 other nurses were trying to shove a tube down his mouth. And he ripped his arms off, he starts pushing all these nurses away. What are you doing? What are you doing? And he said, listen, whatever you want to do, just tell me and I'll let you do it. They said, we got to shove this tube down your stomach, clean it out. She said, fine, let me just get my dentures out. So he took his dentures out, let him shove the thing and do what they did to it. And he said it was fine after that. Surgery, he lost 75% of his stomach, and after that he had a lot of digestive issues throughout his life. He was told that he may not survive the surgery, and if he did, he would only live 5 years. He lived to be in his 80s, outlived all the doctors. He was very hardworking, even worked to the detriment of his own health at times. The 1930s were real tough on the family. They had 9 kids. The oldest child was a daughter, and the youngest 8 were boys. The rest were boys. The boys were pretty wild. They were getting a lot of trouble. They played a lot of pranks on the town. I don't have time to tell stories. But one Halloween, they decided not to go trick-or-treating, the boys did, because they were always blamed for the stuff that was happening around town. So the cops, of course, show up at their house, and they'd just been at home reading books and just hanging out. And the cop was surprised that they were so good that night. It was a family effort in the 1930s for all of them to have their needs met. It took years for them to finish their home. They avoided debt. They bought building materials when they were able to save money and slowly built their home. 6 of their 8 boys served during World War II, including our grandpa Claire, in one capacity or another. Now, their oldest didn't serve, he was married, and their youngest didn't serve because he was too young. Their second to youngest was only 14 or 15. When they found out that he was only 14 or 15, they kicked him out of the military, so he served for a few months. He was a very strong-willed man. He smoked for many years of his life, and they had struggles with activity in the church. There was a period of their lives, in their middle of their lives, where they weren't active in the church. And one day, the doctor said, you better quit smoking or you'll probably, he says, Harold, how long have you been smoking? And then he said, however long, so long I can't remember. And the doctor says, well, you better not quit smoking, because if you do, it'll kill you. Well, he was so mad about that statement, he took the cigarette out of his mouth and threw it away, and after that he never smoked again. But he kept these little mints in his pocket, and that's how he kind of curbed his addiction to want to smoke. Another story of how he was strong-willed is one day he was working building a house, and he cut his hand really bad in the saw. In fact, I think his son Tran went over to find him. Couldn't find him, and he saw blood everywhere. He finally found his dad and noticed he was kind of trying to get this wound to stop, and it was so deep it was to the bone. He's like, Dad, you gotta go see a doctor. He's like, no, I'm fine, I gotta get this job done. And so they finally got him to the doctor, and he was in such a hurry. He said, don't use anesthetic, just sew me up now. So the guy just sewed him right up and got him anesthetic.
Wow.
He's a very talented woodworker. He'd make nice things out of wood, and he was always known for singing silly little songs. Let me just finish up real quick. Silly little songs to his grandchildren. So Mom would remember My Little Girl, You Came Home Early. You probably heard that song. You guys remember that one? So it goes, My little girl, you came home early, and you went upstairs to bed. You put your glass eye upon the window, and your peg leg under the bed. You put your false teeth into a basin, and your false hair on the chair. My little girl, you know I love you, but you're scattered everywhere.
You gotta sing it.
So he sang a little funny little song to that to his grandkids. They struggled with activity, but later they became very active in the church later in life. His wife died, and he remarried in 1960 to a lady named Grace Squires. His heart, he had a series of strokes, and then finally a stroke took his life in 1970.
He had temple rest, and he came to Mom and I's wedding.
Yeah. So,
And this is your what, Dad? Your
this is my
My father's father.
okay. What's the name again?
Her.
What's her name?
Her name is Helen Jane Everett. Which one do you think is her?
On the
Who's
right.
on the right?
On the left.
She's actually the one on the right. Here's a picture of her. I mean, on the left. Sorry, my bad.
Oh,
Which one? This is your left or our left? It's her. Yeah, the one sorry.
Your left.
My left. Sorry. One missionary once a week, and I can barely keep up with that. She wrote to all 6 of those sons once a week. And as
She
much as
couldn't copy and paste the
no. This was handwritten. Yeah, this was handwritten.
she didn't type that, she hand wrote
She hand wrote it, and we're going to talk about typing in a minute. As many as 19 letters a week to some of their buddies. She wrote prolifically to all these children. Yeah. She has also, and it says in the article, she's also expressed her love of beauty through her flower garden. And typical of her youthful zest and energy is the fact that she is now teaching herself how to type. Maybe some of those letters were typewritten. I have 5 minutes? Okay. I just wanted to show her children. So she died when she was, I think I said 64 years old, or 69. And she died in 1959. All of her children outlived her. Although one of them did pass away, Juan Del Tracy, when he was only 40 years old, and some of them lived to be 80. Her son, one of her sons was our grandfather, who is right here, and this is him in the military. This is Grandma's dad. Okay? And obviously my picture don't say.
What's his name?
What's that?
What's his name?
Claire.
That's Claire.
Henry
Okay.
Henry Claire Tracy.
Okay.
Yeah, this is her and her husband later on in life. Just a little older. I can pass it around if you guys want. It's right there. And this is her when they were younger. I should have showed this first. This is them first with their first couple of kids. Well, they're her mother. Sorry, that's her mother, Mormon Harold, and her.
And a relative, his little girl.
Yeah.
It's a relative, it's not their child.
It's a relative. Oh, the girl is too. Sorry, but that's them as a young couple.
His mother, that's Helon's wife.
Okay.
Emma Marie.
Okay, so that's his mother.
Yeah, Emma Marie.
Okay, and then relative child, and then this is actually them with some of their kids. So you can pass these around. And then I just wanted to share before I ended that she wrote a poem about her son serving in the military, and it was never published or anything. It was just found later among her things. And somebody published it online, but it was called 5 Stars, and I'm just going to share it with you. 5 blue stars in a window, gazing at 5 empty chairs, feeling a mother's heartache, hearing a mother's prayers. Each blue star means a loved one gone to serve country and you. Each represents a banner of red, white, and blue. Sometimes the star turns to silver, pointing to foreign shores, guiding a weary soldier safe through the grimness of wars. Each star signifies loneliness, sacrifice, bravery, and fears, hopes for a brighter future, safety from coming years. Someday the stars will be memories, as each one their stories have told. May they always be bright blue or silver, and none ever change to gold.
My name was Robert Andrus. My middle name is Andrus, and so I'm named after him. And his father, Milo Andrus. And I was going to do it like a synopsis or whatever. But there's some really neat things about his life. He was really big into missionary work. It's from his estate that we get the $400. $600. Sorry. So just so everyone knows here. I don't want to cry doing this, but he was.
He's okay.
I can't believe he was successful. If you read his life story, you should. It was written by his daughters, and he overcame so many things. His father was Milo Andrus, and I can't understand. I can't even imagine the life he was. But Milo Andrus had wives scattered from like Idaho, from the Idaho border to the Arizona border, and he would roam from house to house, and he was hardly ever in one place. So, it's almost as if he lost his father right away. There's very little time that he spent with him. But Robert Andrus didn't let that stop him. So, he was born in 1873 in Draper. It was called Dry Creek, but it's what Draper is now.
She was born on March 19, 1872 in Mill Creek, Salt Lake County, Utah. And she actually lived like just a normal life of any child in the Mormon community in the pioneer home, and was baptized at the age of 8. She was known to her parents as like the cherished gift to the world, and one of the important things that she found in her homestead was that she found joy and happiness, some sorrow and adversity, but she found pleasure and like joy in singing and games, feasting and praying, and there were 3 important things that happened in her early years. As a young girl, she was afflicted with an illness which threatened her life, and at the age of 13, she almost bled to death when she pushed the scissors into her hand while trying to make a ring from a nutshell. And one of the main things that happened at the age of 11 was she was given her patriarchal blessing by William J. Smith, and among the holy promises that were made in this blessing was that she was blessed with the fuller understanding of the gospel through dreams and visions, to know the depth of dangers, and the gift of prophecy, the gift of healing, and to render comfort to the afflicted, the sick, and the dying. She was promised that the destroyer would have no power over her, and when ministering to the diseased and dying, and later in her life, during the flu epidemic of World War I, Lavinia and her good husband, Bishop Robert Andrus, never brought the dreaded disease into their family. Yet they gave their aid freely to many families who were sick and who had death in their homes. She was married to him on November 16, 1895, and had their honeymoon trip in the sagebrush plains of the southeastern Idaho and the Snake River Valley. Now at that time, the area was known as Willow Creek Ward, and it was located near to where the present Milo Ward Chapel was built. Milo received its name later and was named in honor of Milo Andrus, who was the father of Sunday school descendants. 2 years later, or in about 1897, they moved about 4 miles west of Milo, where they built a log home and lived in a 2-room structure for 15 years. And later, they built a new brick home near the same plot of ground and moved into it in 1912. Lavinia voiced her appreciation for the new home by saying, "It seemed so much like a dream that I couldn't sleep for many nights." Yes, during their first years in that time, they lived a rugged life in the frontier. A lot of perils and troubles awaited them. And that time, meat and butter were like just luxuries, and winters were bitter and long. But Lavinia and her sister Annie aided their husbands by gathering the sagebrush for fuel after the men had railed it. It was a routine experience for Lavinia to chop ice from the streams and haul it to their home on a handmade sled. The ice was melted, then the following day the washing was done on a washboard. She gave lifetime to the welfare of her family, and she also gave freely to the neighbors and friends. Though her life was full of sacrifices and tribulations for her family and friends, she was content with the fruit of her arduous labors. One of the things that she also did was she did a lot of work in the temples at Salt Lake Valley, Logan, and Idaho Falls. She had a lot of troubles with her physical form as well. Her feet were deformed with arthritis, but this didn't stop her. She still did much of her temple work, and after this problem developed, and of course she contributed generously to the welfare of her expanding and growing family of children and grandchildren. She was raised miraculously a number of times from her own bed of affliction, and after the birth of all the children in her family, she had a goiter removed. And this kind of surprised me a little bit, but what it is, what a goiter is that it's the normal enlargement of a butterfly-shaped gland below the Adam's apple. Symptoms in that.
It's called a thymus.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Symptoms are like coughing, you feel like you can't breathe, you have trouble eating. Later on, when her son Reed was a baby, her eyesight had failed. And the doctor warned her that if she wasn't operated on, she would lose her eyesight for good. But with the power of the priesthood and a fast held by the word in her behalf, her eyesight was restored.
Cool.
Yeah. She lived a life of service, and they were abundant in the years. She looked to the future with hope and happiness, and yes, she did look forward with faith as well. She was a widow for 20 years, and though she lived through many a quiet, lonely moment, yet she constructively utilized her time. Also spent much time reading books in the church, reading books of the church leaders. She studied the works of the church daily, and enjoyed making scrapbooks of greeting cards sent to her from friends and relatives.